Hi everyone, welcome to this video on terminologies and their use in CollectionsIndex Plus. So what are terminologies? They are one of the ways in which we control vocabularies within the system. One way is with authorities, which we'll look at in another video, and terminologies is the other. So to access your terminologies, they have their own menu up on the right hand side. If we click that button there, you'll see this drop-down list. And this list contains all of the different terminologies within this system. So each of these control a different field within a certain type of record. So there are lots of different types of records within the system. There are collections records, asset records, and activity records and authority records. So these will all control different fields within those record types. If we go to one that should be quite familiar, let's have a look at condition. And you can see that at the moment my terminology list for condition contains these terms. I can select a term that already exists, and you can see that we tend to use terminologies when really the term is self-explanatory and maybe there is a little bit more of a record to go along with it, but when that record doesn't need a whole lot more information. So there are different fields for different types of terminology records, but they're usually quite small self-explanatory records. And I can select my record and right click, and you can see these options here. So I can delete records that I don't use. It will double check with me that I want to delete the record, and I can say yes. And then it will delete it from my list. If I try to delete a term that is in use, it will warn me and say that this term can't be deleted because it's used in the records. If I want to check the usage of a term, or I just want to return, say, all of the records that have a fair condition, I can click on this usage button here, and it will show me how many records it's used in, and I can click that link and then retrieve those 4 records that are listed as fair. If I just go back to my terminology list, we can also add terms. So if I right click here and select add, I can add, let's do excellent, and click OK. And now excellent will be an option in my condition drop down. And we'll take a look in a moment about how these terminologies display within object records, but they display the same in all the different types of records as well. So that's a look at condition. We can also look at another very common one, which is location. So you can see here that your terminologies can be hierarchical. Any terminology can be hierarchical. And you can see that we've got different rooms, and then different racks and bays and shelves. And we could go down further, so we could add boxes below this. There's also a free text field in your location section, which means that you could record boxes just as part of the free text rather than as part of this hierarchy if you wanted to. You can of course just record your locations as flat terms as well, but you can use this hierarchy if that's what works for you. If we take a look at this shelf 1, you'll see that we have the term here, which is the mandatory field. Locations have options to add address information, and then if we scroll down you'll see that we've also used the discriminator field. So the discriminator field is used because each term within a terminology needs to be unique. But obviously with certain terms such as shelf 1, you may have multiple shelf 1s in all the different racks and bays and storerooms within your location hierarchy. So we need a discriminator to make this unique, and you can choose whatever that is. That's a free text field. So you can decide, and then that appears in brackets alongside your term. So now if I go to bay B, we can see that I've also got a shelf 1 and shelf 2 in bay B, but they have a different discriminator, which means that they are unique. So I can make a record unique now. So bay A, I can say is store 1, rack 1 there, and then click save, and you'll see that that will add that to my term here in brackets. And then when I go to rack 2 here, I can now add a term by right clicking and going to add, and I can enter bay A there. It will allow me to create it because this is a unique term and this doesn't duplicate it, and then I can use the discriminator field to further record and differentiate this term from any future bay A's that I may need to use. Okay. So you can do that with any of your locations or any different terminology record as well, but it's particularly useful in this instance with our locations. And then the final terminology that I wanted to show you was place. In this instance, we have our world hierarchy, so that by default is continents, countries, and capital cities. But because this is quite a large hierarchy, I might need to search it. You can search any terminology, but it's obviously most useful with very large terminology lists, and especially hierarchical terminology lists. So maybe I want to look for London, and it will take me to that term. And then because there are terms below London and terms below those terms, it means that actually there are 30 terms with London in them somewhere, or as part of the London hierarchy here. So I can click through and find the next one and the next one if they're parts of different hierarchies. So if I search for Halifax, you'll see that there's 2 Halifax terms. One is in West Yorkshire, and if I click find term again, it will take me to the Canadian Halifax there in Nova Scotia. So the search option here for your terms can be very useful as well before you start adding new terms. So we've covered adding, deleting. Obviously you can edit these terms using this edit form as you would any type of record. We've also looked at the usage button for retrieving records that relate to terms. But let's take a look at how these terms and these drop-downs display in our object records. If I head back to our object records, let's edit this one. And we can see some of those examples that we just looked at. So we looked at location, this appears as a drop down, and now within my museum hierarchy we can see Bay A, there, Bay B, with our shelves here, and then the flat terms as well that we can choose from. If we look at condition, we can see this is also a drop down, and we have the option to select excellent now, and relic is no longer in this list. The other example we looked at was place. So place appears in a few different fields. It can be object production place, just down here. So we can see this drop down here with our world. At the moment Cardiff is selected. And we can also see that in history and association we have the option to add an associated place, just here, with that same terminology controlling this field as well. So sometimes terminologies can control more than one field. That's specifically fields such as the associated or production place, the role and association fields for these different elements are the same terminology, so you'll see terms that maybe don't apply to that particular set of fields but will apply sort of across the system. These fields also appear in the archive records, so if we head back to our archive records, we can see how they appear in there if we just add a new record. So these fields are terminology controlled as well with their drop downs. If we go to access points, the place field here is controlled again by that place terminology, and within the archive record it's actually a list field, so we can search and we can select however many terms are relevant here and then see that they appear in this list. So the terminologies are used extensively throughout the system, and obviously that means that they help with searching and retrieval because they ensure consistent data entry, and setting up your core terminologies that you use regularly is going to be an important part of using your system. I should note that the reason I could add terms was because I'm logged in as a user that has admin permissions, so the highest level of permissions for the system. If you set your volunteer permissions lower, or the rest of your team's permissions lower, you can control who's adding these terminology terms to the lists, which means that you have greater control over the consistency of that data as well. So that's something else that's worth looking at. Okay, so I think that's as much information as you need to get started with terminologies. If you have any questions, as ever, we'd love to hear from you. So if you follow the link in the description to our website, you can find our contact details, so our phone number and our email address there. Thanks, see you in the next video.